Good morning. I'm Bob Cusack, the editor-in-chief of The Hill. Thanks for coming. Welcome to the museum. We are live streaming on thehill.com. I want to thank Visa for sponsoring this event. And you can join the conversation on Twitter by following @TheHillEvents and using the hashtag NextGenPay. We've got a great program this morning. House and Senate members, interesting panel discussion as well. I want to first start off by introducing our first two speakers, and I'll be having a panel discussion with them. Senator Peters serves on the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, as well as several other panels. Senator Mike Rounds previously served as the 31st governor of South Dakota from 2003 to 2011. They are both leaders on the new Senate Payments Innovation Caucus, and I'll be asking them about that. Please welcome the senators. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
You know, in preparation for this event, I was thinking about how payment technology has changed, and I think I might be barely the youngest person on this stage, but I remember when you got paid and you had to go to the bank and cash a check before Friday at 3 p.m., and the banks were open for like 2 hours. So first question I want to ask you is, how do you do your banking now? How do you pay for stuff? Some people use apps, some people use mobile banking. Senator, how do you do it?
Most of it, well, it's all direct deposit into my account, and then a lot of it is just automatic pay. So the bills that I have every month, I don't actually have to write out checks or do anything.
It's automatic, all automatic.
Pretty much automatic, yeah, with a couple of exceptions, but that's the way to do it. So I don't have to think about it, and I certainly don't want to be here and have a day go by where I missed my payment date.
Right.
So it's all automated.
And when did you make that transition?
Oh, it was a few years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Senator Rounds, how about you?
All direct deposit. Every payment I can make that's automated, I make it automated. Yeah. I don't want to forget a payment, and I don't want to have to try to remember it. I've got enough stuff to remember the way it is, you know. But I don't want to spend. But I'll tell you something that's interesting, though, how we transition through this. In the United States Senate, it's all direct deposit, but we still get every other week we get our pay stub mailed to us. Now, why? Think about that. Think about how many federal employees still get mailed to them their pay stub. There's no money in it, and it's not an electronic transfer, and you don't even have an option on it. But the post office appreciates our business, right?
Now,
and they could use it, so.
Yeah, they need the help. You guys formed with other senators this Payments Innovation Caucus. How did that get started? You know, you guys are different parties. Don't you know you're not supposed to be talking about them? You know?
We actually like each other. Too.
Really? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So how did you meet? How did you decide you had this common interest?
You know, I guess we both lived in the trailers together.
You need to explain that a little bit.
Well, you know, when you move into the United States Senate, that you don't just get an office. And by the way, the permanent offices are beautiful, but it takes about 6 months to move into your permanent office. So in the meantime, they provide you with temporary quarters, and they're double-wide trailers that are, you know, in the courtyard. So you kind of get to know each other, and things are kind of tightening together. But we had a chance to visit. You know, Gary's the only Democrat in the freshman class, so we kind of adopted him as well. And, you know, so we had a chance to get together and visit.
This is the entire class of the Democrats in 2014.
I speak for the whole. I speak with one voice for my class.
Right.
Class president as well. So.
So you started this, and Senator Peters, as far as the payments industry for your home state, describe it.
Well, it's and that's what really brought me to being involved in payments, is the exciting things that are happening in Detroit and the greater Detroit and Michigan, as well as some problems with underbanked, which I'll mention. But you know, one thing that I think is very exciting is what's happening with automobiles and the technology that's coming in to autos, and that autos are a lot more than horsepower and torque, although those are my two favorite parts of the automobile. But now they're really integrated computer systems. So we're looking at systems for safety where you're going to have vehicle-to-vehicle communications that will, according to the National Highway Traffic Safety Board, could eliminate 80% of all crashes in the next few years as a result of these technologies coming on board. You're going to have self-driving, autonomous vehicles. In fact, just last week I was in a car with going down the road that is driver assist. You put on cruise control, but you also put driver assist, and it actually drives down the highway for you, so you don't have to touch the wheel. And that's going to be available on a high-end Cadillac next year. You can buy that. Next year. So that's happening. So in addition to that, though, there's also payments that are going to be integrated into the Internet of Things. And so there's a project right now in my state with Visa, with Accenture, and Pizza Hut. So that when you have your car, you can say it be in the dashboard. You can order a pizza, and with the technology, you can drive to the Pizza Hut. It'll know what the order is. You drive up, it'll tell you with a Bluetooth that you're driving into the property, so they'll know you've just arrived. Your pizza will be there, it'll be delivered to you, and it'll be fully paid for without you doing anything, without going into your pocket or just picking up your pizza and go. So you figure from self-driving cars that are safe to being able to give you a pizza with just a verbal order and not doing anything more. You know, that's the kind of where technology is going. Payments is integrated into all of that technology.
Now, when is that going to be available?
That I'm not sure the timeline on that, but very soon.
Senator Rounds, what about your home state?
South Dakota was fortunate to have Citibank decide that they were going to move their credit card operations in 1986. We made some legislative changes to invite them in. They came. For Sioux Falls, South Dakota, it became an opportunity to grow, prosper. The payments industry became centered there in Sioux Falls, thousands of jobs, but it moved across the state. Rapid City right now has a new innovative program where you can do your payments simply by touching your finger to a device at one of the retailers in the Rapid City area. So the innovations and the opportunities that come with it have been growing over a period of years. The jobs created in the payments industry are great. They're consistent, and you know, it's an opportunity to grow. So for our state, the payments industry is very, very important. A number of the organizations, national organizations, international organizations, do a lot of their work out of the Sioux Falls and the South Dakota area. So for us, we've kind of grown up with it over the years, and we think it's something that's going to continue to grow. We'd like to be a part of that, but we've also got to be careful, because if you really want the payments industry to be successful, you've got to make sure that they're secure. You've got to make sure that people trust them, and that we stay one step ahead of the bad guys. And that's part of the reason why we wanted to put together the caucus, was to have industry come together and start sharing with government leaders the best ways to stay ahead. And rather than having guys like me who really don't know a whole lot about technology trying to tell the industry, which knows a lot about it, how we should be fixing things or staying ahead, if we do an innovations caucus, they can participate with us and try to lead us down the right road when it comes to the issues of security and innovation, rather than us stifling things by telling them how it should be done.
If I just may add to the other item that I think is important with payments that brought me into this. Obviously, the autos, we have startups in Detroit as well, and Michigan that are doing a great deal of work in payments. But the other area that I think this will address deals with folks who are underbanked or not banked, and we have a big problem with that around the country, particularly in Detroit. It's the second highest in terms of unbanked folks in the country.
But now, when you say unbanked, what does that mean?
They don't have a banking relationship.
No banking relationship.
So no banking relationship, or they're underbanked. They may have an account, but they still go to payday lenders, other types of ways to get financial services, which tend to be a lot more expensive. And these are folks who don't have a lot of resources. And the promise of what we're seeing in payments and the ability to use your cell phone, and most folks have a cell phone, a smartphone, will be able to provide tremendous services to folks who normally did not have access to those financial services. So this is about job creation, it's about less friction, it's about incredible industry growth, but it's also helping folks who have not been helped in the past, and I think is very exciting.
Now, one area where the parties generally don't agree is in regulation, and there have been issues on privacy issues and fraud issues. So, Senator Rounds, how can government and industry work together to protect consumers? Because if you've ever had your identity stolen, if you lost your credit card, it's a very scary moment.
The way that we think it should be done, and things are going to change as we move forward. You're going to have bad guys that are going to try to be one step ahead of the industry itself. And the reason is because they're going where the money's at. And as you do payments, and as more and more payments are electronically laid out, you're going to have more and more of the times in which the bad guys are going to say that's where it's at. It's kind of like talking about old Willie Sutton, and they asked him, why do you rob banks? And he said, well, that's where the money's at. Well, now you got the bad guys in, and they're working through the issue of electronic payments. And the reason is because that's where the money's at. So what we've got to be able to do, I think anyway, when it comes to regulation, is find that common ground where the industry is saying, if we really want to make this work and stay ahead, then the regulations have got to allow us to do that. And if we can get that type of an approach made, pretty soon then it's not a matter of the feds telling everybody what they got to be doing in the industry saying, why are you making us do that? You're behind the times on it. About the time that we take and put together a new rule, the industry is already saying you're behind it already. So if we can take the step of saying, let's find a collaborative effort. Let's find out from the industry what the next steps are and allow the industry to stay ahead of the bad guys and to help them do so with appropriate regulations, then I think we're going to make some success here. And if we don't, then we're always going to be one step behind, and people are going to want to know why we're trying to do something at the federal level which is not up to technology speed. So for me, it's a matter of trying to coordinate, get that open door between those who are being regulated for appropriate consumer protection purposes and those who are trying to regulate for the same reason. But let's get one that actually works, and we're trying to get a common thing going, and that is protecting the consumer and making sure that they feel safe and secure in using the payments industry to do more and more of those transactions.
Mm-hmm. Senator Peter, what do you think? How can government and industry work together and so that technology is not stifled?
Yeah, well, I agree with Senator Rounds in his approach, which may be why we're working on this together. Right? It shows that common ground, that we can find ground, that you have to have the space for the innovation. So we've got to be very careful, and it's moving so rapidly. Even some of the new technologies that were coming out with cards, and now we have the the chip and the signature. That's actually behind where the Europeans and others were, and we'll probably leapfrog over that technology very rapidly to get into biometrics and other kinds of security measures that are going to be there. So you've got to make sure that that space is there. I say that the role for the federal government may be in able to coordinate, bring folks together. I met with a number of folks in the payment industry last night, and they want to have a forum where they can talk with the FBI and talk with Homeland Security, the military folks, other ways to put in the kind of security necessary. Because there's also certainly considerable liability for companies as well, that they don't want to have this information out. It ends up coming back to them. So there's a strong incentive for the private sector to do it, but the private sector can use the resources available from Homeland Security, the military, and others to understand that this is a national security threat. And we've got state actors out there that are using their resources to attack us on a regular basis in the cyberspace. Mm-hmm. And an individual company can't do that by themselves, which is why I think the cyber bill we passed is so important too, to allow us to come together to communicate and present a united front, but understanding you got to let the technology drive it. But I think the federal government can play a very strong role in supporting those efforts. Let me
just, because I think what Gary's talking about here is sometimes we think about it, but we don't go very deep into that, what is actually happening out there. But I'm a member of the Armed Services Committee. The day before yesterday, we had a full 2-hour discussion with experts in the field on cyber war and what's going to happen and what war is going to look like in the future. Where do you define and when do you decide that someone has actually committed an act of war when it comes to a cyber threat? When they start getting into the transactions processes, when they slow down the stock market for just a short period of time? At what point is it that we have had an attack that has been assisted by someone from another country, perhaps on behalf of another country, who is trying to do damage to our economy? And at what point and how do you respond to that type of a thing, if it is, and should we define it as an act of war? And where does the military actually step in? And so if you've got folks here in the United States who are providing millions and millions of transactions on a regular basis, and someone starts to disrupt it, and you cause economic damage to our economy and other of our allies' economies, at what point does the military have to step into the middle of it? And how do you coordinate that so that you protect an asset that's important to a whole lot of people in the United States and elsewhere? So how do you get the industry talking with members of the armed services, and how do you protect them? And at what point is there retaliation necessary so that they don't just get away with trying time and again to get in and to infiltrate and to take without having some kind of repercussions back on the folks who are the perpetrators? Those are important policy questions that have to be answered. And the federal government does play the role in terms of making those decisions.
And bringing people together, because that's the thing, as you look at what's happening. I mentioned automobiles are all going to be interconnected with the Internet of Things, and hundreds of millions of objects that are all going to be interconnected, and the payment system going to be integrated into that as well. That obviously is incredible in terms of the possibilities and the opportunities, but it also raises an awful lot of challenges that no one entity can possibly do. We have to be working together. So I'd say, to kind of wrap maybe some of this up, is the government should be setting some goals, too, of what we need to achieve, because everybody has a responsibility for security. Whoever is the weakest link, it really is a threat to the entire network. So we can't have a weak link. We've got to identify where are those weak links, how do we strengthen those links. That means bringing communication together, coordination, but also using the assets and the reach of the federal government.
And that's what the idea of the caucus was, is to try to bring industry together to say, look, let's put together a voice so that policymakers at the federal level have an opportunity to hear from the industry firsthand about what needs to be done and the appropriate direction and what the innovations are that are possible in the near future. So you've got to have a way, a role, a voice somewhere in getting that communication. We'd like this Innovations Caucus to at least play a part in that role.
You guys formed this caucus, as you mentioned, to spotlight this issue. And if you look at the big political picture, the 2016 race, both sides vying, candidates vying, really we haven't heard a lot about this issue. Do you think that this issue needs a lot more attention, and it actually needs more at the presidential/presidential candidate level, Senator Peters?
Yeah, I think it does. It's not at the high level now because it may not be as sexy as some other issues to go, but this is going to be an issue that will become a real big issue when we've already seen breaches, but if you see a major breach, then everybody was going to be saying, why didn't you do anything? Why haven't you made these preparations? And so the most effective policy is where it really never comes to that level of consciousness with a broad audience, because everything works fine and there aren't any problems. But that means there's a lot of work that's going on underneath to make this happen. And that's why this caucus is important, because it isn't going to be an issue that's always going to be on the top of people's minds. And we get pulled so many different ways in the Senate and the House and others that you've got to have a focus, though, on some of those primary issues that really underlie the strength of our economy and the potential vulnerabilities that are there, which is why this is so important. But I don't know if you'll see it much on the stage in a presidential debate, unless there's another major cyber attack, and then that'll be all that people will probably talk about, and they're going to wonder what has been done. We want to be ahead of that curve. We want to actually be putting some substantive work in place so that hopefully we never get to that point.
And one of the concerns that you'll have is remember, most of the things right now in the presidential election are being done in 30-second sound bites. And the other side of this discussion that we sometimes don't talk about is the privacy issues. And we're going to have to make sure that as we talk about protecting private information, and as we start talking about sharing data when someone is attacking, so that the companies can get in with the folks at the federal level, at the state level, but also with one another to share and say, this is where the damage is being done, this is what's happening to us, and we have a system in place to actually respond to it and to protect the other systems from a new type of an attempt to get in and to infiltrate the system. We've got to have the American public have confidence that this is not a case of trying to share private information about individuals, but truly an attempt to protect citizens from the bad guys getting in and taking a whole lot more than just private information, but taking their resources as well and taking their assets. And I think that sometimes is going to get lost in this discussion, because a lot of the point of view and a lot of the discussion at the presidential level is going to be, well, what about our rights and what about our privacies, and aren't you just simply trying to give the government more information on it? We've got to make sure that we get ahead of the game and share with people that's not what this is about. Right. This is about protecting your information and doing it as appropriately as we can. And unfortunately, that means that the federal government has got to play a role in the industry and in providing the resources. This is a case of where if you do not have the system set up in advance, you're talking about being able to get anywhere in the world into and infiltrate in like 0.67 milliseconds. You can't come in and ask permission to get permission to come in and fix something. You've got to have a prearranged plan in place and set up within the systems in order to have the protection in the first place. That's the part that I think people sometimes think about, well, can't you just fix it once it happens? Can't you go and stop it and then do the research and find out how you how you track it down. This has got to be put in place before it happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
Senator Peters, you mentioned that you were talking to leaders in the industry, and they're saying they'd like to have, it seems like, more consolidation as far as the federal government. Do you think that's one of the challenges? Like, overall, what are the challenges facing the industry? And do you think the executive branch needs to speak with one voice as opposed to, a different agency, they don't talk to one another? Is that part of the issue?
I think there does have to be a greater coordination. In fact, I think the White House has made some recent announcements about bringing people together to coordinate that, have a central point of focus with the executive branch to bring in all the agencies. Because we have all of these different agencies all doing their thing, but if they're not coordinated, it's not going to be as effective. It's the same with private industry. You have all these industry players that are all doing it as well. So I think there's certainly a very, which I'm hearing, a strong consensus that we've got to be talking in one room and sharing ideas, which is the basis of the cybersecurity bill that passed out of the Senate that's now going into conference, which is really about sharing information, protecting privacy information, which is critical, but still sharing information about threats, and also a better understanding of what the capabilities are, and to be able to react quickly, as Senator Rounds mentioned. In fact, yesterday the industry group said, the problem is if they had an attack in their cluster of businesses and the federal government comes in to help, but if they're not really aware of all the intricacies of what they do, it's going to take a long time for them to be helpful in a meaningful way. It's better to get them involved now to really understand the industry and how they work, and for the industry to know how the FBI may work, for example, or whatever the agency is, so that when there is an attack, there's a quick, immediate response that is effective, because speed is of the essence.
And it's not just the executive branch. Look at the legislative branch. You've got Armed Services in both the House and the Senate. You've got the Intelligence Committee in the House and the Senate. You've also got Homeland Security, House and the Senate. And you've got banking, House and Senate.
Right.
And all of them have a role to play in this process. The way that our system is set up today, all of them are concerned about it, but how do you coordinate and get all of the different areas of responsibility coordinated so that the industry can actually protect its assets and the assets of the consumers that are trusting.
We're almost out of time. We're a year away from the election, and presidential election years especially, legislation doesn't move. Do you think there will be a cyber bill signed into law? Senator Peters. I'm
very hopeful. I think there's certainly an understanding of the importance of it. We saw broad bipartisan support, so I'm very hopeful and I believe it will happen. First step only, and I think it will happen as well, but I don't think we stop there. Right, yeah,
but
absolutely.
In order to do it correctly, we shouldn't do knee-jerk where it's the policymaker stepping in, telling everybody else how it should happen. We really need the industry actively involved in providing direction and focus and coordinating, because they're the ones that are going to have to implement it. And if we put together policy that is not implementable or is not flexible enough to allow for new technologies. I mean, you think about tokenizing right now and how that works. You've got to be able to put this together so that the industry can respond and stay ahead of the bad guys.
Right.
Senator Rounds, Senator Peters, thanks so much. Please, a round of applause for the senators. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Well done.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Thanks.
We're now going to move to the sponsored content with the industry perspective. I want to introduce Mark Nelson. He is the Senior Vice President of Risk Products and Business Intelligence at Visa. Please welcome Mark Nelson.
All right. Thank you. All right. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Visa, thank you for attending this event. Obviously, security is very important for Visa, and maintaining trust and confidence in payments is critical to our success and to payments going forward. And we've had some headwinds lately in this space. There's been high-profile data breaches, and there's more data breaches than ever before. From 2013 to 2014, there's a 23% increase in data breaches. And not only are there more data breaches, but the magnitude of the events are bigger. So more account numbers are being exposed, more consumers have been impacted. And so it's challenging because fraud is not new to payments. Like, Visa has been processing payments for 50 years. And one thing that is certain is we will have fraud, and fraud changes over time, and fraud patterns evolve. And one thing that we see now is criminals are very sophisticated and organized. And the good news is the industry continues to invest in new technologies to stay ahead of the criminals. And if you look at our 50-year history, every year, throughout the years, we have continuously decreased the global fraud rates. We are at near historic lows in fraud in payments. So fraud represents 6 cents for every $100 spent. Right? And it's because we invest in technologies like chip and tokenization. In the last 4 years, we've been working on deploying chip technology in the US, and we are confident when we look at other countries that have deployed this technology, it will effectively reduce counterfeit fraud in the US. It will take a couple years for this technology to have an impact, but we're very confident that this will play a significant role in further reducing our fraud rates. But we have a multi-layered approach to security at Visa. So chip is just one example of technologies, but there's other things that we're working on that we know will have an immediate impact going forward. And one of them that is often been played behind the scenes is predictive analytics. And predictive analytics uses mathematical algorithms to look at historical transactions to try to predict what's going to happen in the future. And we use predictive analytics for fraud detection. And our solution that Visa has offered to our clients is called Advanced Authorization. And the way it works is, every time you use your payment card, either at the point of sale or if you enter your credit card information online, every time you use your card, we analyze that transaction. We look up to 500 different data points and we predict what's the likelihood of fraud on this transaction. And we calculate a risk score and we give that risk score to our issuing banks. Those issuers use that risk score to say, yes, this is good, or no, this is suspicious. Let me contact the consumer to verify that they participated in this transaction. And probably most of you in the room have had a call from your bank saying, hey, we noticed something. Did you do this? You know, yes or no. So that's predictive analytics behind the scenes. And we constantly rebuild these models. And as I mentioned, fraud patterns change, and they change all the time. So every year, these predictive analytic models are changing, and they're enhancing. And what's exciting about predictive analytics is, as computing power gets stronger and better, and we have new technologies like machine learning, these all make predictive analytics better. And on top of that, what we constantly do is look for new sources of data to add to these predictive analytics. So what I want to talk about today is a couple of things that we're doing, things that are available today. One is geolocation. And so geolocation is, we use the location of your cell phone, and we match that to where is your card being used right now. So for example, I live in California, and when I landed at the DC airport yesterday, I turned on my phone. Visa now knows that my cell phone is in the DC area. So later, when I pay for my cab, when I pay for my restaurant with my Visa card, we can compare the merchant location of Washington, D.C. with my cell phone location, and we can match those and say, hey, the locations match. We can then use that as an input into our predictive models, and we can then tell the issuer that this is a lower risk transaction because the proximate locations of the cell phone and the card are the same. Vice versa, you can say, hey, if I am in California, my cell phone's in California and it's turned on, but I see my payment card being used in Brazil, the bank can say, hey, the locations don't match. There's something unusual going on. Let's flag that as suspicious. The bank can then call you and say, hey, is this you making that transaction in Brazil? So geolocation is in play, and it's working today. And the beautiful thing about it is that it's up to the consumer to decide if they want to opt into that service or not. So we have banks around the world that are actively deploying this technology as an additional layer of security for transaction processing. The other thing I'll talk about is biometrics. And we're starting to see biometrics be used for payments today. And I think for most of you, if you've seen Apple Pay or some of the new pays like Samsung Pay and Android Pay, you're starting to initiate payments with your fingerprint, right? And so it's biometrics being used at the point of sale. And what's interesting about this is when I use my biometric to initiate the payment, we send information to the point of sale terminal that says this cardholder has been verified. What that means is you no longer have to sign, you don't have to enter a PIN to complete that transaction. So a biometric is being used as a replacement for more convenient and stronger ways to verify a consumer's identity. And this uses, it works on top of the EMV chip infrastructure. So anywhere I go in the world that has an NFC-equipped terminal, and I use my Apple device to pay for something, it uses my biometric as my form of identity, right? So biometrics is going to play a bigger role in payments going forward because, once again, it can be more convenient and it can be a stronger form of verification. So one question people always ask is, well, what type of biometric is going to win out? And from Visa's point of view, we aren't selecting any particular type of biometric. There's numerous ways to authenticate yourself. You could use your voice, you could use your facial recognition, you can use your iris scan, you can use your fingerprint. Our role is just to make sure that when biometrics are used for payments, we do this in a safe and secure way so that the biometric data, if it is ever stolen, it cannot be reused. And that's a key theme to our overall strategy at Visa from a payment perspective, because we know cyber criminals are not going away. Data breaches are going to continue. So what we can do as an industry is make sure that we remove the sensitive payment data from the ecosystem where possible. So there's a number of different ways we do this. Chip technology removes sensitive payment data. Tokenization does as well. Encryption does. All of these data and all of these technologies work together to protect our data. So once again, if the data is ever stolen, criminals simply cannot reuse that at all. And so going back to biometrics, one thing that we think is really important is this concept of match on card or match on device. And what that means is, if I go back to my Apple Pay example, when I register for Apple Pay and I enter my biometric as from my Touch ID, the biometric is only stored on my Apple device. There isn't a central database that has millions and millions of consumers with their biometric fingerprints stored on that device or in that database. And that we think is important because you can distribute now the biometric data to individual devices, which means it's less susceptible to a large-scale data breach. So this match on device is really what we see as a way to deploy biometric technology, which can be encrypted and secured so that we can protect it going forward. So once again, we do think that by combining the multiple layers of technology with chip, tokenization, encryption, biometrics, geolocation, we can further reduce our fraud rates. So 10 years from now, when we look at our fraud rates, we're very confident that our rates will be lower than what they are today. So we will continue to stay ahead of the criminals and protect the security. So once again, we're proud to be sponsors of this event, and we will continue the dialogue going forward. So we'll go to the next people. All right?
Thanks, Mike. Thank you. I want to introduce our next speaker from the House. Congressman Ed Perlmutter serves on the House Science, Space, Technology Committee, as well as the Financial Services Committee. And we're talking backstage, he's pretty good at cartwheels as well. I don't think you can see them today, though. So please welcome Congressman Perlmutter. Hey, guys.
No cartwheels today.
Well, the first question I want to ask you is, you know, we were talking earlier with the senators about how this field has changed so dramatically. I was watching a rerun of Seinfeld, and he was doing a bit about how women are so good at paying at the grocery store with checks. I mean, when's the last time you saw someone whip out the checkbook at the grocery store? Now, I know from personal experience, though, you've been affected. You've been hacked several times. Is that right?
Right. Well, the systems that I'm part of have been compromised or hacked.
Okay.
So we're shoppers at Target. My wife says if Target doesn't have it, she doesn't need it. And we shop a lot at Target, and they got breached. There was a big data breach there.
Right.
I'm insured through Anthem Blue Cross. They were breached. So overall, the system's been compromised. Whether my exact account has been compromised, we don't know, but they have to worry about everybody within their system. Have a mortgage with JP Morgan, same kind of thing. There had been an overall breach to the system, and so you get the letter saying this may have been compromised. It doesn't look like it when I look at my transactions that there are any problems, but the system. And then finally, because I'm an employee of the United States of America and the Office of Personnel was hacked. Again, same kind of thing. Notice to our office, please be aware. So, you know, obviously, the systems are really great. They're convenient, they're efficient, but they're also subject to the criminal attacks and theft and robbery and embezzlement and fraud and all those things that were talked about by Mark and by the senators.
As far as data security, there are a lot of proposals in the House floating around, and you are working. You have legislation. Can you describe it, what it would do?
Well, we call it the Data Breach Insurance Act. And what it involves is, you know, just go back to the basic structure of these things. We were talking, you know, there's bad actors, there's good actors, there's the criminal who wants to steal something. And we don't know what that something is anymore. It could be, you know, I've got a fuel band and somebody sees I'm limping and I'm a quarterback of an NFL team and they use that information to bet or something. You just don't know what it is anymore. So what we want to do is we want to provide an insurance mechanism for which you'd get tax credit. You'd be able to apply a tax credit towards insurance if you have implemented a cybersecurity sort of infrastructure strengthening or fortifying, kind of like Visa's been fortifying their system, knowing full well that there are a lot of mad geniuses out there trying to figure out how to either be vandals, you know, just for fun, screw it up, or, you know, for profit, take something. So we want to, the president a couple years ago, as part of an executive order, said to go to the National Institute of Standards and Training would put together some cybersecurity infrastructure things that might make sense. And if a company or a person or a system benefited and went to that and started fortifying their infrastructure, they'd get a tax credit and they'd get insurance on the other side in case there was a big breach.
Okay.
So you're actually, you know, insuring for a data breach.
Okay. And now what's the next step? Getting co-sponsors, because there are, as I mentioned, there are several bills. There has been no real consensus, right?
So there hasn't been much consensus because this is evolving like crazy. I mean, you go back to the basics of, you know, we have plenty of laws about the crime of theft or burglary or fraud or embezzlement or whatever. So that is in place. And, you know, it used to be, okay, you steal from the stagecoach, you know, and they've got the trunk. And so, you know, I was trying to think about it, so you fortify the trunk so that when they rob it, you know, they can't get into the trunk, but it's still stolen from me. And so we're trying, the whole system has evolved now. You know, I was listening to the senators. They have, you know, automatic deposits, automatic payments. Now that the system is really changing and is much more convenient, people are understanding that. I think we're not going to try to prescribe the technology. The Visas of the world and their engineers know what's best for them.
Right.
But we want to provide this insurance. And so now I think that it's not I don't see it as a Democratic Republican kind of a, you know, schism or chasm. I think I'll get some co-sponsors for this and get this moving, because then you get the insurance industry trying to figure out what the risk is, you get the companies trying to minimize their risk, and we'd have the federal government urging people to take steps through a tax credit.
And I asked the senators, as you saw, how do you do your banking? Obviously, every time you've been scared because you've, you know, several times you've had to make sure that you weren't hacked. Do you do automatic? Do you know? Because I'm kind of in the mix. I do some online and some paper.
I'm with you. So I probably visit. So I bank at Wells Fargo. So I probably go to the bank from time to time. I transact business with the tellers.
Right.
I go to the ATM that's just outside of the bank and I get cash. I do have you know, direct deposit. I have some automatic payments, but I do write checks. So it's a, you know, for me, it's a mixture of things. And you know, the easier it is, sometimes you kind of forget and you don't look at your bank statement. You go, okay, what happened there? And but for the system, for the bank, for the system that's doing the transmitting of the transactions, the remittances, for the company, the retailer, so to speak, they need to have some precautions in place. And just remember, you know, so you'd have the stagecoach driver and the, you know, the policeman or the guard right next to him. So, you know, we can go back and just look at different ways that we've sent the money, we've sent the treasure, we've sent the dangerous material, and how do we protect it? And that's really, we're just sort of moved into a whole new payment system, and we've got to figure out ways to protect it and defend against folks who would do some harm.
And are you, as far as the 5 years, 10 years, can both the legislative and executive branch keep up? What's the key there? What are you concerned about?
Well, in terms of understanding the technology as it continues to evolve and change, you know, I'm a lawyer, practiced law for a long time before I was elected to Congress. I'm not a mathematician. I don't write algorithms. That's not what I do. But I can set policy about crime or vandalism or accidents. You know, sometimes it isn't that somebody meant to do anybody any harm. It just, all of a sudden, the information went off the rail for some reason or other and went to a lot of people it should never have gone to. So I think we have to, just as the senators were saying, I think they were absolutely on track. And, you know, sometimes I'm not sure about the Senate in that respect. But, but I thought those guys really, they want to set the broad policy parameters involving crime or accident. How dangerous is the treasure? How valuable is the treasure? Is it, you know, you could have an Edward Snowden. You know, he was in Fort Knox of information. You know, whether he's Paul Revere or Jesse James, I don't know. But I see all of us working together to try to set the broad policy parameters, giving these evolving payment systems and information systems. And, you know, we can provide insurance to the private sector if something gets breached, or the individual if it gets breached. The national security questions are much bigger. You know, as if China or somebody is attacking our system or probing our system, what do we do about it?
You've worked with Republicans in the past, and as you mentioned, this issue is not Obamacare. There can be consensus. There is but there has been a lot of gridlock in Washington over the last several years. There's a new House Speaker in Paul Ryan. Do you see more legislation on cyber and other issues? Are you hopeful for maybe not 2016, maybe a little bit in 2016, but going forward in 2017? Do you get a sense that there is a new sheriff in town? He met with the Congressional Black Caucus, or is this just kind of a honeymoon?
I think it's a wait-and-see time. I know, Paul, I came up and, you know, Mark was up here with his phone. I just want to show my phone with the Broncos on the back. And so I gave Paul...
Who just beat Ryan's Packers.
So
right?
I had to point that out to him a couple days ago. He wasn't particularly happy about that. So, no, he's a friendly, engaging guy. And I think that can benefit all of us. On something like cybersecurity, you know, the real issue is kind of the privacy components of this. How much information is shared? To whom is it shared? Why is it shared? In an effort to minimize the crime or the accidents or the attacks.
Right.
And that's the real tussle, can be within caucuses, the Democratic caucus or the Republican caucus, between those that want more safety and security and those that are saying, wait, that's giving away too much information or allowing people to have too much information about a particular thing, and the privacy of that individual or that corporation or whatever is being compromised, you know, in the name of security. So that's the tussle we're having right now.
Right. What do you hear back home? You know, in the Beltway, we talk about legislation and a lot of acronyms. When you go back home, whether it's on privacy or emerging technologies or government regulation, what are you hearing that you bring back to Washington that maybe Washington doesn't know?
I actually, as you're saying that, when I was walking precincts last fall, I was in Arvada, Colorado, and I went to a door, and the guy comes out and he starts talking in terms of privacy. He had worked for the federal government. He was worried about the privacy of the individual, and I must have been on his doorstep for 20 minutes as he was talking about you know, the availability of information and the fact that he thought too much information was being shared, and it was very much a libertarian kind of comments to me. So you do get these things at the doorstep, or you know, there was other times it could be credit card fraud. Somebody had his identity taken. And through a credit card fraud. I had that at a doorstep. So people, I mean, these are in their daily lives, the transactions that they worry about. Maybe from the one guy, very philosophical, you know, high level, privacy is being compromised, to the other person who actually had been ripped off.
Now, you serve on two relevant committees, the Financial Services Committee and the Science Committee. What are those panels working on that people should know about?
Well, both panels have relevance and jurisdiction to this subject. So, Financial Services Committee, as I said, we're going to introduce this data breach insurance and try to get it moving. John Carney and I think Randy Neugebauer have a bill on the Data Security Act, which kind of expands some things in Gramm-Leach-Bliley, you know, from a number of years ago. So there are some cybersecurity pieces within that committee.
What do you think of that legislation?
I don't think I've gotten on it as a co-sponsor yet.
No, you're not a co-sponsor, no.
Okay,
no.
Good. A little too prescriptive for me.
Okay.
I think it needs
obviously, that's why you have your own bill.
A little too prescriptive. I'd rather have the individual or the company or the system be able to say, you know what, we're fortifying, we're going to take advantage of a tax credit, it's all voluntary, and we're going to get insurance, which the system understands very well, and let the insurance company sort of try to figure out the risks of some major loss. So there's that. So then on science, space, and technology, that one, so Visa came and a number of others came and talked to us about all the encryption devices and the evolution of this thing. So we have two major national labs, Sandia and Los Alamos down in New Mexico, and I can't remember which one is doing it, but they are coming up with something they think is the best way to encrypt things ever, and it's unbreakable. Now, some genius time down the road will figure out how to break it. You know, you got different kinds of safe crackers, and they live to try to break something like that. But we, on the Science Committee, are really looking at, you know, the future and the far-reaching technologies of information management and information science. So we don't have any particular bills there, but it's been for us to kind of learn about this tremendous change and speed in which we pay things and we give up information, whether it's from a fuel band to the phone to the iPad to whatever it might be.
Do you think a cyber bill will be signed into law before the 2016 election?
There's a chance, yes.
Okay.
Yes. I think that there is building consensus about the need for collaboration, and we are working on trying to balance the privacy aspects versus the collaboration and the security piece. And I think we're getting close. There will be somebody who doesn't like one side or the other side of it.
Sure.
But our job is to move this forward, balancing as best all of these aspects.
Better sooner than later, though, right?
Better sooner than later, because we have been, whether it's national actors or just somebody having fun or some criminal, I mean, these things seem to be accelerating at a pretty rapid rate, and we need to have as many individuals and companies and agencies talking to one another to really set up a pretty strong perimeter and try to balance that against, you know, your personal, you know, you went to the doctor yesterday and you don't want that known to the world.
Right.
So, you know, it's not easy, but we're getting there. And I think we'll have it done before the end of the year. I mean, not this year, but before the end of this session. Yeah.
Okay. Just last question, open-ended, kind of a closing statement. Anything I didn't ask that you think should be emphasized in this field?
Well, I think that we as policymakers, you as the journalists, we shouldn't get lost in the technology, because we're not the scientists, we're not the engineers, and sometimes you can get lost in all of this, you know, fast-moving evolution. We got to go back to the basic transaction, which is I'm providing you information or I'm handing you my treasure, and we don't want it stolen, we don't want it compromised, we don't want it lost in some fashion or another. So for us, we got to go back to the basics of this, that there's a buyer, there's a seller, we're somehow getting the money from the buyer to the seller. There's information that is important to me, and it's private to me. I don't want somebody getting it. You know, just to get back to the basics. Otherwise, we get lost and kind of everything comes to a halt.
Well, thank you so much, Congressman. Please thank the Congressman.
Thank you
I really
all.
appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob.
Take it easy. Hey, thanks. I really do. I want to introduce our next panel, which will be moderated by Corey Bennett. He's a staff writer for The Hill. Ben Flatgard is the Director for Cybersecurity Policy at the National Security Council, and Jason Oxman is the CEO at the Electronic Transaction Association. Please welcome them. Hey, thanks. Hey, thanks. Thanks. Hey, good luck.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for sticking around for the final panel here. I think you'll enjoy our panelists here. As Bob mentioned, we have Ben and Jason. And I figured we'd start off. We're going to get into payment security and EMV transition, but wanted to start with kind of the sexy topic of the day, information sharing, given that legislation actually passed on this, both houses of Congress. So Ben, I figured I'd start with you real quick. Just give us a sense of how you see these partnerships, these public-private partnerships, sharing information. Where do they stand right now, particularly maybe thinking about the financial sector? And then Jason, we can have you hop in, give kind of the other perspective on that. So Ben, yeah, I'd love you to touch on that.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me here, and excited to talk about this. So I think the great thing about information sharing is it represents the need for public-private partnership in general in this space. You have the government on the one hand who has a certain mission to protect national security, and as a result of that mission learns things about the world. On the other hand, the private sector, the financial sector, if we want to use that as an example, is the target of a lot of activity. You know, the Willie Sutton reference was made before, but is the target of criminal and other activity in cyberspace. And as a result of those two different perspectives, you gain different amounts of information, and only by weaving them together in a really rich and sophisticated and partnership type model can you understand the full picture of what's going on. So I think it's crucially important that we target partnership in this space and continue to enhance it. I think legislation gets us a long way because it starts to, by applying targeted liability protections around sharing of information, you start to develop trust between these different agencies. And I think trust is the key word. We've seen it in the financial sector as a specific example. Trust has been the difference between the financial sector establishing a really successful ISAC, just for the sharing of information within the sector itself, only because you have CISOs and chief security officers and analysts at different financial companies that have gotten to know one another, that know they can trust the information that's given to them to be valid, reliable, and impactful. Do you have people willing to come to the table and reveal a little bit about what the vulnerabilities in their systems are, what the threats that they're seeing might be? And that creates a richer community. So through targeted liability protection, I think we'll start to enhance that trust, both in private-to-private information sharing, and we'll certainly start to enhance that trust in federal government to private sector information sharing.
And Ben, you mentioned the ISAC. Jason, maybe you can explain a bit about exactly what the function of an industry ISAC is, perhaps from your perspective at ETA, the kind of information you're sharing, what the state of that partnership is, and kind of what might you like to see else in that partnership moving forward?
Yeah, as Ben mentioned, the financial services industry has been heavily involved in information sharing for a long time. In fact, the FS-ISAC that Ben mentioned was founded in 1999. So this is something we've been doing for a very long time, and the IS in ISAC stands for information sharing. So this is something the financial services industry is very familiar with, and by necessity, of course, because we are targets of cyber criminals on a daily basis, thousands, tens of thousands of times a day. Efforts are made to penetrate the nation's payment system, and fortunately those efforts thus far have been unsuccessful. We have to work very collaboratively as an industry, as we have been doing since the FS-ISAC was formed. That information sharing takes place within the financial services industry. So what's exciting to us about the passage of S-754 and CISA moving to conference and hopefully moving to the President's desk very soon is that it broadens out the ability of all players in the ecosystem, because of course cyber criminals target anywhere where they can find information that they can monetize. So we do need to broaden out that information sharing, make it available on a voluntary basis to every industry player so that the success of the FS-ISAC can be replicated across other industry segments.
And the administration is trying to broaden that on its own as well. I mean, I know there was the recent executive order and these kind of ISOWs that people don't exactly necessarily know what they're going to look like at this point. So what's the update on that? Where do we stand on that, and what might those actually look like, and how might they differ from something like an ISAC that already exists?
Yeah, it's a real alphabet soup here in Cyber City. Always
is, yeah.
So the model is that these ISACs are communities, right? They're communities of trust, as I said. The ISOW now is an organization. They were designed to be sector specific. The ISOW is designed to enable anyone who wants to form a community, anyone who has shared business interests, any potentially events that are about to take place. Say the Super Bowl could form an organization that had community of interests to monitor for cyber activity in that space. And so the model that the president launched in February at the Cybersecurity Summit in Stanford was this model of creating the ability for organizations to form these communities of interest, to share cyber threat information, to provide analysis together in a safe space. And I think what that does is allows us to scale the model, right? We've proven the model with the FS-ISAC, with the financial sector. We can now scale it so that others can take advantage of what's proved to be a pretty successful mechanism. It's not just the financial sector either. You see out in Silicon Valley, the Cyber Threat Alliance is a group of cybersecurity firms that are really sharing information in some innovative and dynamic ways. And so you've seen other people already starting this. We think by setting up this model, this structure, you're going to see it take off. And the way we're doing that is we're establishing standards in this space. So the president's order called on DHS to name a standards organization. Now that's been done in this last month and a half here. University of Texas at San Antonio, in partnership with LMI, have been named the standards organization. And over the next year, they're going to solicit feedback. In fact, their first public meeting is next Monday. They'll be soliciting feedback from people who are already engaged in information sharing and companies that have tried to get engaged in information sharing, maybe some of those communities that know there's a need but aren't quite sure how to get started, to understand what the best practices are and what the barriers to entry are, so that really we can create an accessible model for everyone.
Absolutely. Just very quickly, when do you think we might start actually seeing an ISOW, and does legislation that, if the president signs it, does that help speed that process up?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're already seeing ISOWs, right? I think the FS-ISAC's an ISOW, the Cyber Threat Alliance is an ISOW. All of these organizations are ISOWs, and so it's already taken place, and we've seen a lot of interest in new communities that are going to start fresh.
So now transitioning a bit to the EMV transition, October 1st, there was this switch in liability that does have the potential to change both kind of the shopping experience and also the type of technology we use to pay for things, essentially pay for everything. So let's just get a sense of exactly what this EMV transition was, how it might affect your day-to-day shopper, and kind of what we're seeing with adoption currently. And Jason, I'd start with you, from the ETA perspective. What are you guys seeing?
So this is a massive undertaking by the payments industry, by the retail community, and just to give you an idea of the scope, there are 1.2 billion debit and credit cards in American consumers' wallets, and there are 8 million merchants in the U.S. that accept electronic payments. So this is an infrastructure upgrade that's enormously complicated, the largest ever attempted on the planet. But it's very important. Electronic payments, as we all know, are vital to consumers. U.S. consumers racked up about close to $6 trillion in electronic payments in the U.S. last year. This is their preferred way of engaging in commerce. And let's talk about why we're doing the EMV migration. Why we're doing it is because cybersecurity is incredibly important to our industry. It's important to merchants, important to payments companies, important to consumers. The #1 type of fraud in our industry this year that retailers are the victim of is counterfeit card fraud. It's the preferred way for criminals to monetize stolen account numbers that they get from these data breaches that we read about.
And explain the type of breaches that are those, you said, the preferred way. What are the major breaches that we would affiliate with that type of fraud?
Right. So I hate to be the third person to mention Willie Sutton today, but cyber criminals like to target places where they can find large numbers of account information, and some of the big retailers breaches that we've seen have been the sources of that information. So then what do the criminals do once they steal those account numbers? They print up counterfeit cards. And they do that with those old mag stripe cards. We're all familiar with the magnetic stripe. It's actually a 40-year-old technology, same technology used in cassette tapes. That's how old it is. Now, those who remember cassette tapes know you can record over your old music and put new music on it. Right, it's a great technology. You can do that with a magnetic stripe credit card as well. You can record new track information on there with stolen account information and go use it at stores. That's 2/3 of fraud in stores today, those counterfeit cards. So we moved to the chip cards that we're in the process of deploying, those EMV chip cards. That makes it impossible to counterfeit a card. So right off the bat, it attacks the single largest form of card fraud in stores today, and that's why we're doing the migration. Now, as I mentioned, this is an incredibly large undertaking. Banks need to issue 1.2 billion cards. That's very expensive. Merchants need to upgrade their equipment. That's very expensive as well. This is a process, not an event. It is going to take some time for that to work its way through the system. So you mentioned October 1st, which we kind of think of as the start of the migration with the liability shift. That just means it's an incentive for banks and merchants alike to go ahead and do their upgrade to avoid the risk of any fraud liability from counterfeit cards. The eventual goal of doing this is to wipe out counterfeit card fraud. It's part of a suite of security upgrades that we're going to undertake over the course of the next year to attack all forms of fraud.
Now, you mentioned it is a process. So where are we in that process? What is adoption among, how many cards do we see out there, chip cards? How many retailers have the proper payments installed or payment mechanisms installed? How is that transition going, and when do you expect it to be past a certain kind of threshold that is acceptable?
Right. So the transition is actually going incredibly well. We already have hundreds of millions of cards out in the market just a few weeks after starting this migration. And in fact, the U.S. is actually the largest chip card market in the world. You know, it's been, what, 5 weeks since October 1st, and we've already surpassed every other country in the world as the largest chip card market. So there are hundreds of millions of cards in the market. Hundreds of thousands of merchants have upgraded. Now, obviously, the priority for merchants to upgrade is going to depend on the risk of counterfeit fraud. We know that fraudsters target merchants where they can buy things and easily monetize them. So they're going to go to electronic stores, buy a TV, resell it online or at a pawn shop. They're going to go to jewelry stores. They're going to go to convenience stores where they can buy gift cards that can easily be remonetized. So those are the kind of merchants that are upgrading early and quickly. The big box merchants are all done. They've invested enormous sums of money in these upgrades because they know it's important to protect their customers. But some smaller merchants in categories that don't have a lot of fraud risk, not a lot of people take a counterfeit credit card and go buy a $1.50 cup of coffee, or go pick up their dry cleaning, or go rent a hotel room and then stay there for 12 hours and use a stolen card, or go sit down at a restaurant for 3 hours and use a counterfeit card. So some merchant categories are not upgrading quite as quickly just because the risk of fraud is lower. We do expect them to do so over the course of the next year or so. You asked about benchmarks. You know, we're expecting by the end of this year that close to half of the cards in the market will be already chip-enabled. And we're moving quickly to get to everybody, but it's going to take some time. As I said, it's a massive undertaking.
Now, the chip cards that are being sent out, as you mentioned, are attacking kind of this biggest category of fraud, but these are chip-in signature cards. A lot of people have asked, why not chip-in PIN cards? Explain that difference and explain why we're not moving to chip-in PIN cards and what type of fraud those might be able to stop, and why we aren't using those, why we aren't enabling customers with those.
Sure. A lot of people talk about chip and PIN cards because that's the model they're familiar with in other markets. You go to Europe, for example, and you use your chip card. Most issuers in Europe issue those cards together with a PIN. And the reason that was done in Europe is actually because of the, believe it or not, the telecom infrastructure. And if we can bring lunch in, I'll spend the next couple hours talking about how that infrastructure is different from here. Don't panic, I'm not really going to do that. But I am going to say 2 sentences on it. The first sentence will be that in Europe, card authorization takes place offline using handheld terminals for the most part. You're all familiar with that cafe in Rome or Paris where you go sit and then
which I frequently travel to.
Which is exactly why I use that example. Yeah. And the terminal comes to your table, you insert your chip card and type the PIN. It's actually the terminal that is authorizing the transaction. It's called an offline authorization. So the PIN is actually crucial to that transaction because the terminal validates the PIN. The card is not communicating with the network. So it's the PIN that validates the transaction to make sure it's authorized. Here in the US, everything is online. So it's the network that authorizes the transaction, so the PIN is not quite as necessary. You asked what the PIN addresses, the type of fraud that the PIN addresses, and there is a category of fraud that the PIN addresses, and it's called lost and stolen fraud. So if I steal Ben's wallet, which I actually did earlier when we were out in the green room, and go out and try to use his card before he reports it stolen, if he's got a PIN associated with that card, I won't be able to use it. That's why lost and stolen fraud is addressed by a PIN. That's actually a pretty small percentage of fraud. I mentioned that about 2/3 of fraud in stores is counterfeit. About 8 or 9% is lost and stolen. So it's a pretty small percentage. The challenge with the PIN infrastructure here in the US, and some issuers are using PIN. In fact, the federal government, as a card issuer, is doing a chip and PIN. So some issuers are doing it. Some issuers use it as a competitive differentiator. If you travel overseas, you might want to PIN cards. You can use it at unattended retail at the train station, for example. But the challenge is most merchants in the US actually don't have PIN pads, which is kind of, again, part of how the infrastructure grew up here. So no restaurants, for example. There are 1 million restaurants in the US. None of them have PIN pads because we're not used to paying at the table in the US, so they don't have PIN pads. A lot of merchants and retailers just don't have PIN pads. In fact, about 2/3 of them don't have PIN pads here in the US, so that's part of the challenge of the infrastructure. And then for fraud prevention, we've probably all seen, when you go into a store, a convenience store or a fast food restaurant, you actually don't have to use a PIN or a signature or anything. And in fact, about 70% of transactions that are processed in the US have no cardholder verification method at all. Just because the fraud risk is so low. So again, back to the beginning, we're addressing the #1 type of fraud, counterfeit card fraud in stores with the chip. The chip doesn't require the PIN to work. The PIN is actually about to celebrate its 50th anniversary. It was actually invented in 1967 by a Scottish engineer who figured out a way to protect ATM transactions with a 4-digit code. We're moving to a lot more secure cardholder verification methods, and I know we'll talk about biometrics, fingerprints, retinal scans, pay by selfie, all those kind of things too. So a lot of great stuff to come, but that's the story.
Ben, Jason gave a nice shout out to the administration and the fact that you guys were an early adopter of chip and PIN and just chip cards generally. President Obama issued declarations about this several years ago at this point. So give me a little sense of where the administration stands on chip and PIN and chip cards more broadly.
Yeah, so for us, it's really about protecting the security of consumers' financial lives. It's about safeguarding the financial system as a whole and the stability of that financial system. And it's ensuring American competitiveness, right? This is ensuring that commerce can take place freely in our country. So we, as the administration, decided that we actually have a big stake to play in this game for all of those reasons, but also because we're a large provider of cards and a purchaser of cards. We issue cards to government employees who are traveling, and we give cards to people who are receiving federal benefits. And so what the president did last year with his executive order that's now in the process of being implemented is say that for the federal government application, we want to provide those users, federal government employees and recipients of benefits, with cards that have chips on them and that have PIN technology enabled. We've also said that we want to upgrade the terminals. When you go to a national park, or if you're in the military and you go to an exchange to purchase stuff on a base, you interact with the point-of-sale terminal, right? And so we have a role to play in actually purchasing those terminals and setting the standards by which people who contract on federal government property purchase those terminals. So we said, if you're doing it, if you're in that space for a federal agency or you're working on federal property, you have to put in place terminals that can accept chip cards. And so that's taken place. Agencies are rolling that out now on an ongoing basis. We're seeing good use of that chip technology as new cards go out. And I think more to come in that space.
And certainly, you know, the chip card is an ongoing process, but I know the administration has also kind of thought past that. Looking down the road, what else are you guys thinking of in terms of mobile payment, and when might you see kind of full chip implementation, and then kind of looking past that, mobile payment-wise, what's going on there?
Yeah, so I think the important thing in recognizing that we need to shift to EMV technology now is that, as you've said, this has been around for quite a long time. It's the standard of today, and it's where industry and consumers want it to go. I think in the future, if you keep those ideas in mind, that really it's about the consumer and it's about enhancing competitiveness and maintaining commerce, you'll see all sorts of innovation in this space. So that's how we wrote the executive order when it came out last year, is we wanted to push for more enhanced security measures, so we didn't dwell or sort of lock ourselves in on a specific technology. I think the congressman said this earlier, very well. The time it takes us to write one of these orders or for them to pass a bill up on the Hill is many cycles of innovation. And so we want to push for more enhanced security measures here. I think you're already seeing lots of mobile technology as as terminals that accept EMV roll out into the market. A lot of them are coming with things like NFC readers built in so that you can use things like Apple Pay or Google Pay.
And you can use Apple Pay at state parks now, right? Or is that, did I misread that? I won't put you on the spot on that.
No, that's all right. I think what happened is the Apple CEO said he looks forward to the day when you can do that, and we certainly do too, and we're working hard to get there. But there are also technologies like Samsung has acquired a technology and has rolled out this new product that allows you to make more secure payments using your mobile phone on some of the old terminal technologies as well, to your point that the adoption isn't going to take place overnight, and this will be a continuous process. And I think through that process, we'll see what people prefer. I mean, I've got to be honest, in terms of convenience, swiping a card is pretty easy. I think sticking a chip into a reader is pretty easy too. And so hopefully we'll move past the point where we're at now, which is sort of adding security on as another layer to an already existing technology. And you'll see security baked in to new products that people will expect to be secure, but they won't be bogged down by by an unpleasant consumer experience because of additional security measures. And that'll be a better result for consumers, businesses, and the security of the ecosystem as a whole.
We've mentioned Apple, Samsung. Jason, this is something that I know you're keyed up to talk about. So give me a sense of what we're seeing from them. What are kind of the exciting secure payment options in your opinion? And then maybe throw us a moonshot or something. Like what's way down the line that is kind of a crazy option that we might see someday?
Sure. Should I start pulling devices out of my pocket?
Just, one by one.
Demoing them, because we love all of our members equally. I have to carry them all around. No. I think what's exciting about mobile payments is obviously there's a cool factor. And we all know that Americans love their mobile devices. There are more mobile phones in service in the U.S. than there are people in the U.S. People love paying electronically, so it's a natural combination. And I think what great ETA member companies like Apple and Samsung and Google have done introducing these various mobile payments products is really given consumers an easy way to start doing something on their mobile devices that really makes a lot of sense. And there will be, as Ben said, there will be a transition period where people get used to the idea, because in a way, we're a victim of our own success. The plastic card is very easy to use. It's ubiquitous. The infrastructure is ubiquitously deployed, and people are very accustomed to using it. But of course, 4 or 5 years ago, nobody thought we'd be carrying our music collections around on our phones or using them as GPS devices. Nobody buys digital cameras anymore. There are a lot of things we do with our portable devices that we didn't contemplate even a few years ago, and I think payments is one of those things. As far as security goes, there is no question that the implementation of all of these mobile payments platform, whether it be Apple's or Samsung's or Google's or any of the others, is the most secure implementation of payments ever deployed on the market. And the reason for that is the tokenization technology that goes into it. When I pay with my watch or pay with my phone or any device, I'm transmitting not my actual account number, but a token, which is a mathematical representation of my account number. So even if it's intercepted by someone, they wouldn't be able to do anything with it because the token cannot be tied back to my actual account number. They can't use it for another transaction. In fact, the transaction token is a one-time use token that will never be used again. So again, even intercepting it would be of zero value. So that's why these implementations are so secure, and tokenization is another technology along with EMV that's really helping the battle against cybersecurity. Of course, consumers are accustomed to having zero liability for transactions, no matter matter the form factor. If they use their card, if they insert it, they swipe it, they tap their phone, tap their watch, they have no liability if something goes wrong. But it's really incumbent on us in the payments industry to keep deploying these new technologies to encourage the fight against cybercrime.
You mentioned biometric selfie payments.
Yeah.
What's kind of an out there potentially way to secure these electronic payments that we might see a couple of years from now? You know, maybe it's not around next year, but down the road.
Yeah, and I think, and we talked about this before, getting away from static means of verifying who you are. That's
and what
really,
do you mean by that?
Like a PIN, for example, or a signature, any kind of static form of technology. You know, PINs were good 50 years ago when there was no other way to verify who you are. What we'd really rather do is move to more dynamic forms of security. And all of these technologies that we've talked about use dynamic security in some form. Even the EMV chip, the real difference between the EMV chip and the magstripe card is that it generates a dynamic security code with each transaction, whereas your magstripe card has the same security code every time you use it. So dynamic security is very important. You know, whether it's the fingerprint or biometrics, your watch can do a lot of interesting things, including knowing when it's on and when it's off. So if I take this off my wrist, the permission that I've given the watch to engage in a payment transaction goes away, and I would have to enter my code. Whereas when it's on my wrist and I activate it with the code or activate it with my fingerprint, which is an even more secure way to do it, which Apple and Samsung both allow, now I can use it for payment. But again, when you take it off, it doesn't detect your heartbeat anymore, and it knows it's gone. That's a very cool and, again, dynamic technology. Selfie payment, another great way to do it. But you got to be careful to make sure you do things like check to make sure your eyes are blinking so someone can't use a picture. You know, so the technology is evolving. The moonshot is full biometrics, the idea that you don't actually have to do anything or rely on any static technology at all to make a payment. And I think that's going to be here a lot faster than people might otherwise imagine.
Okay, well, on that hopeful note, we have hit the end of our time here. So a big thanks to our panelists, Jason, Ben. Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks.
Hey, thanks, guys. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice job. I just want to close the program. Thank all the speakers for participating, especially the members of Congress. I want to thank Visa again for sponsoring this event. Thank the live audience, as well as those who watched us on thehill.com. The full event of this video will be available shortly on thehill.com. Have a nice day.